Have you ever wondered how water flows through your house? I mean, we need water for so many reasons for cooking, cleaning, and bathing. Now, there is a plumbing system in place where there are pipes that transport water to different parts of the house, and a pump and a storage unit to make sure that it's always available. But that's only one side of the story. What happens to the used water? Where does that go? Well, there's a different system, the drainage system, that carries the wastewater away. So, this intricate plumbing system ensures that water is always available to us and used water is always taken away. Now, what if I told you that there's a pretty similar transporting and waste removal system in our body, except it's far more advanced? Because you see, our cells are pretty busy producing energy, repairing, growing, and carrying out various other functions. And to do all of this, they require raw materials. So let's say we take the example of energy production. We know that for energy production, cells require glucose and oxygen. Now, glucose is obtained by the digestion of food that happens in the small intestine, while on the other hand, oxygen comes from the air, which is present in the lungs. So, how do they manage to reach each and every cell of our body? Well, that's where another connective tissue comes into the picture, the blood. And the blood is a transporting system that ensures that all these raw materials reach different parts of our body. So, blood is said to be a connective tissue because we know that connective tissues are responsible for connecting and binding different parts of our body. And blood is responsible for connecting and binding different parts of our body by transporting important substances to different parts. So they're responsible for carrying nutrients and oxygen to different parts of the body and also picking up waste materials like carbon dioxide and urea and carrying them away. And this transport is non-stop because without this, life would end within minutes. Which is why in today's video, we're going to learn about blood as a connective tissue in great detail. Now, blood is specifically said to be a fluid connective tissue. So, what could be the reason behind this? Now, we know that blood is not the only connective tissue in the body. There's bones, there is cartilage, we have areolar tissue, there's adipose tissue, but they are all found in specific locations of our body. But blood, on the other hand, it's constantly on the move. It's constantly flowing and connecting different parts of our body. And this is because its matrix is fluid that helps it flow through closed vessels and connects different parts. So, we're going to learn about the different components of blood and how they serve as a connective tissue. Now, when we talk about components of blood, it basically answers the question as to what is the blood made of. Because whenever we think of blood as this red color fluid which is constantly flowing inside. But when we look closely, blood actually is made of different components. Well, it has a fluid component which is called as plasma, and it has a cellular component which includes different types of cells like RBCs, WBCs, and platelets. So I want you to think of the plasma as the highway and these cells as vehicles that travel through the highway. And we're going to understand the role of each of these components, starting with plasma. Now, like I said, plasma is the highway through which everything travels. Now, it makes up about 55% of the blood, and it's a pale yellow fluid which is mainly made of water. Water actually makes up 90% of the plasma and it acts as the main medium that so that it keeps everything flowing. But why does plasma exist? Why is there a need for a fluid matrix? Why not have a matrix like the bone or maybe the cartilage? Well, the thing is, plasma is not just there to be a fluid medium. It has a lot of important functions to carry out. You see, it transports important nutrients like glucose, amino acids, and vitamins, and we know that they're all extremely essential to cells. They're also responsible for bringing cellular waste from different parts of the body so that it can be excreted out. And they also transport important proteins like albumin, salts, minerals, hormones, and enzymes to different parts of the body. So it's almost like a silent background worker keeping our body in balance. But now, of course, this is the fluid part. But within this, we find different types of cellular components. So, next up, let's discuss the different cellular components, starting with the red blood cells. Now, the red blood cells are also known as erythrocytes, and there are about 5 million red blood cells, and each cell has the ability to live up to 120 days, after which it is replaced. Now, let's say from this 5 million, we look at just one single red blood cell. It has a characteristic biconcave shape or a disc like appearance. Now, why are these cells shaped in this way? Well, it's because the biconcave shape makes them flexible to squeeze through the narrow capillaries. Now, let's have a closer look at this cross section. Now, the red blood cells are called red, or they get the name red blood cells because they're loaded with a protein called as hemoglobin. And this imparts the red color to the blood, which is why hemoglobin is also known as the red pigment. But why do these red blood cells need this pigment? So I want you to think of the RBCs as delivery trucks and hemoglobin as the actual carrier where we put our goods. So effectively, hemoglobin is the part of the red blood cell that carries out its function. And RBCs are responsible for the transport of oxygen. Now, how do RBCs manage to do that? Well, you see, hemoglobin has high affinity for oxygen. That means whenever it sees oxygen, it has to bind with it. So hemoglobin temporarily binds with oxygen, forming this compound called as oxyhemoglobin. And as the red blood cells travel through, right, this oxygen moves around in the form of oxyhemoglobin. But once it reaches closer to its destination, what happens is that the hemoglobin and the oxygen go back into its original compounds or into its distinctive compounds, where finally they break into hemoglobin and oxygen respectively, and then oxygen diffuses into the cell. So with this, if you see, the primary function of red blood cells is the transport of oxygen. Now, as a matter of fact, in mammals, mature red blood cells actually have no nucleus and they have no mitochondria. What could be the reason behind this? Well, if there's no nucleus, it means that there's more room for hemoglobin, so that in this case they can carry more oxygen. And if they don't have mitochondria, then they themselves don't use the oxygen that they're transporting. And in mammals, there's a very high demand for oxygen, which is why the red blood cells have these structural modifications in them so that they can carry out their function effectively. Now, in our case, of course, we have red blood. But did you know some animals like octopuses and some arthropods don't really have red blood, but instead they have blue blood? This is because they don't have hemoglobin in their body, but instead they have another pigment called as hemocyanin, which is a copper containing compound, and it is responsible for transporting oxygen. So with this, we have understood the role of red blood cells in great detail. Now next up, let's meet our body's security guards, the white blood cells. Now, unlike the red blood cells, which are millions in number, we see that there are only about 4,500 to about 11,000 white blood cells. So compared to red blood cells, they're relatively lesser in number. Now, if we were to look at their structure, we see that they don't really have a definite shape, but rather it appears irregular and amoeboid, which is why WBCs are said to have an amoeboid shape. They are called as white blood cells, right? Or what is the reason behind calling them as white blood cells? It's effectively because they don't have any distinct color to them. That means they have no hemoglobin in them, unlike the RBCs. But one thing that's different about them is that they do have a nucleus and a mitochondria. But now you must be thinking, why did I refer to them as security guards in the beginning? Well, it's because the white blood cells are responsible for defending our body against infections. And they are the frontline defenders that quickly attack bacteria if at all they manage to invade into our body. Now, if we were to observe these white blood cells under the microscope, they'd appear to look something like this. Now, both of these are white blood cells. But notice how they both look different from each other. because there are these darkly stained parts in the white blood cells, but they both look different. Well, that's because although white blood cells are lesser in number, there are different types of white blood cells in our body. And broadly, we can classify white blood cells into two categories as granulocytes and agranulocytes. So let's quickly look at this classification of white blood cells. So, first up, let us look at granulocytes. Now, what do you think granulocytes means? So, if the word granulocytes are there, it has something to do with granules. So, these are the category of white blood cells that have granules in their cytoplasm, which makes their cytoplasm appear all grainy. And if you were to look at their nucleus appears to be lobed, right? It's either bifurcated into 1, 2, or 3 lobes. So we say that they are multi-lobed. And within granulocytes, we find different types like neutrophils, eosinophils, and basophils. Now, neutrophils are the most common type of granulocytes that quickly attack bacteria as soon as they invade into the body. Eosinophils are responsible for destroying parasites, and along with the basophils, they play a key role in allergic reactions. Now, on the other hand, we have agranulocytes. So, when we say agranulocytes, that means that these are white blood cells that do not have any granules in their cytoplasm. And along with that, we see that they have a single large nucleus, unlike the granulocytes. Now, under agranulocytes, we see that there are lymphocytes and monocytes. Lymphocytes are responsible for making antibodies that fight against specific invaders, and monocytes move like amoeba and they end up swallowing germs. So, all in all, we see that there are different types of WBCs that are diverse in the way they attack, but all in all, they are responsible for protecting our body against harmful invaders. Now, next up, let's look at the last component in the blood, which are the platelets. Now, imagine you get a cut when you fall down and you see blood oozing out of the wound. Now, this is sometimes painful. So, we rush to get medical help. But after some time, we notice that the blood stops oozing out. Now, if we leave it on for a couple or if we leave it as it is for a couple of days, this wound gets sealed on its own. So, what stops us from endlessly bleeding? Now, this is our body's emergency repair team, which are the platelets. And these are tiny disc-like cells which are roughly about 1,50,000 to 4,50,000 platelets, which we find in 1 microliter of blood. Now, what these platelets do is that wherever there is a wound, these platelets rush to the site of the injury and they form a clot, right? So think of this clot as a seal or a barricade that ensures that no further blood is lost from the body. So therefore, platelets play a crucial role in blood clotting. So with this, if you see, we've had an elaborate understanding about the different components of blood. Now we know that blood is a fluid connective tissue which has a fluid part and a cellular part. The fluid part includes plasma that is mainly made of water that is responsible for transporting nutrients, waste, and various proteins. RBCs are responsible for transporting oxygen, while WBCs are responsible for protecting our body against invaders. And finally, platelets are our emergency repair team that ensures that wherever there are wounds, it forms a clot and ensures that there's no further blood loss. So with this, we've had a pretty thorough understanding about blood as a connective tissue, and I hope now it is clear to you.